One afternoon, I received a call from an unexpected person. It was Nancy, my former best friend who snatched away John 10 years ago. Reluctantly, I answered the phone. Without much of a greeting, Nancy blurted out something shocking.
I had twins. I need $15,000 for my baby shower gift.
How dare she say such a thing after stealing happiness from me? Dark emotions began to surface, but thanks to George, who looked worried beside me, I managed to calm down. That's right. I have George next to me now. Nancy, hearing my silence, prompted me for a response. I answered her cheerfully. Sure, I'll bring it over with my husband, the bank president.
What?
I could hear the astonishment in Nancy's voice. I continued my words to Nancy. I got remarried.
Why didn't you tell me?
Obviously, I didn't want you meddling again.
But we're best friends, aren't we?
Nancy screamed about betrayal, but I just smiled. Then I slowly replied, You betrayed me first. Nancy was at a loss for words. I hung up and explained everything to George beside me. And we decided to go ahead with our revenge plan. My name is Emma. I'm a 45-year-old housewife. I am happily married with my husband and 2 children. George is my second husband. He was a single father with 2 kids already. I wanted to support him when we met and decided to marry him. George is very kind and family-oriented. Despite being busy with his work, he helps out with household chores and childcare. I really love him. Conversely, I still think my first marriage was a failure. I met my ex-husband John through the internet. We matched and got married around when I turned 30 because we clicked well. But after getting married, I realized our hobbies and values were completely incompatible. But by then, it was too late. Still, both John and I tried to compromise at first. The dark clouds over our marriage began about a year after our wedding. It started when my best friend visited our new home. This led to my downfall into despair.
Hey Emma, can I come over to your house?
Well, Nancy. That was the call from Nancy, my best friend. She couldn't make it to our wedding, so she wanted to come over to celebrate us.
Would it be okay to come over when your husband is home? I want to greet him.
I'd love that. Please come over. Nancy has been my best friend since high school. She was the first to speak to me when we started school. Despite everything, I still loved her dearly. I readily agreed to Nancy's proposal, never imagining it would lead to such an outcome. The following week, Nancy arrived at my new home with plenty of gifts.
Nice to meet you. I'm Nancy, Emma's best friend.
Nice to meet you, too. Emma's always talking about you.
Nancy smiled sweetly and greeted John. Following John's lead, she entered the living room. I walked behind them and headed straight to the kitchen.
Oh, I'd like some tea.
Then I'll have some too.
John usually sticks to coffee, so him drinking tea was a surprise. From the kitchen, I sighed as I looked into the living room.
Got any tea?
While asking me, John was fixated on Nancy, not even looking my way. Nancy has always been beautiful, and she's even more stunning now, so I understand why he's captivated. But still, as a married man, it seems inappropriate to drool over her. Despite my farts, I responded, "Yay, we don't usually have it. Nancy, you couldn't drink coffee, right?"
I can, but
Nancy said, glancing at John. I like Nancy, but I honestly dislike that gesture of hers. Because when Nancy acts like that, most men end up doing whatever she wants.
Since you've come all this way, you'll go buy some?
As expected, I sighed at his words. Nancy looked a bit troubled but didn't say she would settle for coffee. Reluctantly, I went to buy tea. After purchasing it at the nearest supermarket, I walked home. Then, my phone rang. It was John.
Sorry. Could you also buy some sweets on your way back?
Well, wait. John hung up before I could respond. After that, no matter how many times I called, John didn't answer. He must be engrossed in conversation. Reluctantly, I stopped at a bakery before heading home. Yeah, I'm home.
Oh, welcome back.
When I entered the living room, the window was open. They were both lightly dressed. Perhaps it had been too hot. They should have just turned off the heating. I talked to while thinking. Was it hot?
Yeah, it was kinda hot.
You should have turned off the heating.
Yeah, that would have been a good idea.
John seemed flustered. There was no change in the living room, and Nancy was smiling at me. I had a bad feeling but pretended not to notice and laid out the cake. Here you go.
thanks, Emma.
Nancy thanked me cheerfully and picked out a cake, then sat down next to John to eat. I watched them and felt uneasy. But since Nancy has always been someone who gets close to people, I thought it was pointless to say anything and tried not to think about it.
Hey, Emma, John is really wonderful, isn't he?
I guess so. I answered shyly to Nancy's comment. Then, with a pretty smile, Nancy continued talking while resting her hand on John's knee.
Yes, he's really handsome, and above all, he's a banker. That's impressive.
Thank you. You're lovely too, Nancy.
Oh, I'm flattered.
John, a banker who had recently been promoted, smiled happily when Nancy complimented him. Though it was supposed to be the three of us, it somehow turned into their own little world. Feeling uncomfortable, I silently ate some cake and moved to the kitchen.
John, can I come again?
Of course. Please catch up again? Right, Emma?
And I looked up. That was when I first noticed Nancy leaning against John. You can come, but aren't you guys getting too close?
Are you jealous, Emma? If you're too clingy, John might not like it.
It's not like that. When I responded firmly to Nancy's teasing, John frowned.
Emma, that's rude to Nancy, who came all the way here. Apologize.
What?
You need to apologize to her.
John had never raised his voice before. So I was taken aback and widened my eyes.
It's okay, John. I'm not mad, right, Emma? We're best friends, aren't we?
Sorry. I apologized reluctantly, and Nancy looked very pleased. Beside her, John also looked kindly at Nancy. Watching this made me feel terrible. Nancy stayed for dinner that day but was glued to John the whole time. And finally, she hugged him before leaving.
Nancy is really beautiful, isn't she?
Did you enjoy flirting with my best friend?
What? Are you jealous?
No. After Nancy left, when I confronted John with a stern look, he immediately became sullen.
It's not jealousy but envy. It's not good to be envious just because Nancy is beautiful.
It's not that.
Give me a break. I'm going to sleep. You take care of cleaning up.
John said that and quickly went to the bedroom. Left alone, I cried while cleaning up. And from that day, John's behavior started to become clearly strange.
I don't need dinner today.
Again today.
Got a problem with that?
It's not that, but John started eating out about half a week. He said he was busy with work, but from the excited way he acted, it didn't seem like work was the reason. I had a bad feeling about it, but I tried not to think about it too much.
Make sure you iron my dress shirt properly. Don't embarrass me.
Sure. Since Nancy came around, John started treating me with disdain. It was very sad and very hard on me. I once asked John why he was acting that way, but he just glared at me and didn't really respond.
Don't worry about that, and just get on with the housework.
That's all John would say, and he stopped helping out at home. On the days he said he didn't need dinner, he would happily leave the house, and I watched him go with a heavy heart. A month of this went by. Then one holiday, Nancy suddenly showed up.
Emma, hi. I need to talk to you.
Nancy, I told you to wait.
But
The conversation that unfolded at the doorstep made my bad feeling turn into reality. Since when? John answered awkwardly, muttering.
Since the day Nancy came.
Hearing that, my world went dark. Then Nancy spoke to me.
I thought it was wrong. He's your husband, Emma. But I fell in love with John.
As she said this with tears in her eyes, John moved closer to her. Honestly, I had sensed this might happen ever since I first introduced them. I had just looked away. Are you going to divorce me?
Sorry, but I've fallen in love with Nancy. I'll pay the settlement. So please don't ask her for it.
John's words hit me like a blunt object, and anger surged within me. Why do you get to decide that? I'm asking for a settlement from both of you.
Okay, I'll take care of Nancy's part too.
Do as you please. I couldn't hold back my scream as I saw the man I loved protect his mistress, and Nancy flinched. John held her protectively. I felt like I was losing my mind. I divorced John soon after and moved out with the settlements from both of them. I heard through the grapevine that they got married not long after. While I was grieving, I started a new life. Fortunately, I found a job quickly. Once I got used to the job, I found a new boyfriend, and I gradually stopped thinking about John and Nancy. My new boyfriend, George, is a very kind man. George is divorced with 2 kids. Despite his busy job, he puts his all into parenting, and I completely fell for him. George loves me wholeheartedly. He introduced me to his kids early on, and they got along well with me. After dating for about 3 years, we got married. Surrounded by blessings from our friends, I quit my job to support him and became a homemaker. I lead a very happy life now. I no longer think about John and his life, enjoying a smooth-sailing marriage. Trouble often strikes when least expected. One afternoon, I received a call from an unlikely person. It was Nancy, my former best friend who had stolen John from me a decade ago. Reluctantly, I answered the phone. Right away, Nancy blurted out something astonishing, skipping any formalities.
I had twins. I'd love a $15,000 baby shower gift.
After she had taken my happiness, the nerve of her. Dark feelings began to stir within me, but George, looking concerned by my side, brought me back to my senses. Right. I have George next to me now. Nancy, not hearing a reply, pressed me for an answer. I responded cheerily to her. Sure, I'll bring my husband, the bank president.
What?
I could hear Nancy's incredulous voice. I continued. I got remarried.
Why didn't you tell me?
Obviously, I didn't want any interference again.
We're best friends, aren't we?
Nancy screamed about my being cold-hearted, but I just smiled broadly. Then I slowly replied. The first betrayal was yours, Nancy. Nancy was at a loss for words. I hung up unilaterally and explained the situation to George beside me. That's when I decided to go ahead with my plan for revenge. George and I discussed and refined the plan. Originally, I had forgotten about the plan due to the joy of our relationship. But if she's going to bring it up again, that changes things.
You should go all out.
Thanks. I replied gratefully and nodded. Then, I repeatedly simulated the upcoming meeting with Nancy set for the following week. On the appointed day, I headed to the address Nancy had given and rang the doorbell.
Welcome. Well, is he your husband?
Yes, that's right.
I didn't know you remarried. You could have told me.
How could you say that? Nancy's face clouded for a moment, but she still ushered us in with a smile. The interior of the house was larger than the one John and I had lived, with designer clothes and bags scattered around. All obviously Nancy's. Do you still like designer goods?
Yeah, but honestly, I prefer simpler things.
Though I had asked the question, Nancy oddly answered, looking at George. That reminded me of how John had behaved. I wanted to shout right then and there. George stopped me.
Nancy, Emma was the one who asked a question. I don't really need to know.
Oh, right.
Caught off guard, Nancy's face fell flat. Just seeing it makes me happy. Thank you.
You're welcome.
George, who says this with a smile, I truly believe is my greatest ally. As we enter the living room, there's John, lounging comfortably, who looks up in surprise when he sees me.
Emma, what are you doing here?
What do you mean? Nancy invited me.
Really? Nancy? Why did you invite her?
John looked confused. Then he looked behind me, and his surprise deepened.
The bank president. Why are you with Emma?
I remarried. He's my husband.
What? You remarried?
John kept tilting his head, comparing me and George. George's brows furrowed at John's rudeness.
Do you have a problem with my wife?
No, absolutely not.
John straightened up as he replied, looking rather pathetic. Nancy seemed to think the same, sighing exaggeratedly. But that's Nancy for you, not stopping there.
Nice to meet you. I'm Nancy, Emma's best friend.
She said, leaning towards George, who dodged her. Yet Nancy didn't give up.
You're so handsome. May I ask your name?
I have no intention of telling you.
Oh, so cold. Come on, it's okay, right?
Nancy reached out and touched his arm. In an instant, he slapped her hand away.
Out.
Nancy, what are you doing to my wife?
John glared at George in response to Nancy's small cry of pain. Then George, looking utterly exasperated, turned to John.
Your wife touched me out of the blue.
Still, don't you feel sorry for Nancy?
Not really. Rather, she should reflect on her frivolity, getting married yet so readily touching another man.
At George's words, Nancy's face turned red. Seemingly quite vexed, she glared at George. Then I spoke up, facing Nancy. There goes Nancy, trying to steal someone else's man again.
What?
Did you think I hadn't noticed? I pulled out a photo from my bag and scattered them. The photos showed many men. Nancy turned pale upon seeing them.
What's this?
These are photos of Nancy's past boyfriends.
Well, Nancy is beautiful, after all.
Sure, but that doesn't justify stealing other people's partners repeatedly. John also turned pale, recognizing the situation, but quickly picked up one of the photos.
Hey, is this a recent photo?
Oh, that was just taken the day before yesterday. Upon hearing this, John glared at Nancy. Then he thrust the photo at her. It showed Nancy walking arm in arm with a young man.
What? Why is there such a thing?
Hey, weren't you supposed to be at your mom's house because she was sick the day before yesterday?
John raised his voice. Nancy tried to make excuses while avoiding eye contact, but it wasn't working on John.
That's it. I'm divorcing you.
Why would you say that?
As they started arguing, I intervened. The conversation wasn't over yet. I showed them another photo. This time, John turned pale.
What is this?
This is you in the picture, isn't it?
John frantically shook his head, but there he was clearly in the photo. Faced with undeniable evidence, John slumped down.
Please, please don't fire me.
I can't just let someone who embezzled stay on.
But how could this?
Yes, John had been embezzling money from the bank. We found out soon after we started planning. When George hired a detective, there had been frequent discrepancies in the amounts in John's department recently, and George had been suspicious of John, who was rumored to be living lavishly.
Not only did you hurt and abandon my wife, but you also committed crimes as a banker. That disqualifies you, doesn't it?
I'm sorry. I needed the money. I'll pay it back.
If it were that simple, we wouldn't need the police.
At George's words, John collapsed to his knees, bowing deeply. Nancy, looking down on him as if he were trash, said,
And you said you got a raise recently. That was a lie.
It's because you keep splurging on designer stuff?
It's your fault for not bringing home a proper paycheck as a banker. You're the worst.
What did you say, you bastard?
John glared at Nancy. But Nancy, thinking she had the upper hand, wasn't fazed at all. I handed her a document. Someone in debt shouldn't be talking.
What? Why do you have that?
Because you didn't borrow from a reputable source, the interest has ballooned. Look stuff for you ahead. After saying this to Nancy, I made a phone call. After finishing the call, I addressed Nancy again. Nancy, you've always been popular, haven't you?
So what?
But did you know you were actually disliked behind your back?
What?
Nancy looked at me with a puzzled expression. Indeed, during her school days, Nancy was truly disliked behind her back. Though she was popular with the boys because of her cute looks, her bad attitude and habit of stealing other people's boyfriends had made her resented by the other girls. When I mentioned this, Nancy's mouth twitched as if she was really unaware of it. You might think you were popular, but people just hated you and looked at you from a distance.
No, that's not true.
To prove it, no one invited you to their weddings. Nancy looked startled by my words. I thought we were best friends, and I didn't think she would make a move on my partner, so I had invited her to my wedding. She didn't attend due to a scheduling conflict, but had she been there, I might have been criticized by my other friends. I shuddered now, thinking about it. However, Nancy didn't seem to have the luxury to care about how I felt.
It's not true. I was popular because I'm beautiful and inapproachable.
Nancy muttered to herself, which was honestly creepy. After a bit, she suddenly looked at George and tried to lean on him.
George, you think I'm beautiful, right?
George silently avoided her. Angered by his reaction, Nancy reached out and grabbed him.
Why are you avoiding me?
Because it was creepy.
Creepy.
Yes, you seemed like a witch.
Completely losing her composure, Nancy started to act wildly, her hair disheveled. Seeing this, I thought to myself how apt George's words were. George continued to speak clearly.
My wife is more beautiful than you, so I have no reason to be swayed by you.
More beautiful than me. Impossible.
Yes, it's true. My wife is the most beautiful inside and out.
George's words brought tears to my eyes. However, Nancy was outraged at being told I was more beautiful.
Emma's more beautiful than me. Are you blind?
If you're implying there's something wrong, then it's with your brain.
What?
George kept provoking her, and Nancy lost her temper. As this was going on, the doorbell rang. Seeing the visitor, Nancy turned pale.
No, I don't want this.
Well, good luck paying back your debts.
No.
With Nancy's scream, the door opened and some intimidating people entered. They stood by Nancy's sides and took her away somewhat forcefully. John watched this, trembling. Seeing that John didn't try to help his wife, I thought to myself that I really did the right thing by divorcing him. It was painful and hurtful, but thank you, Nancy, for taking him off my hands. Apparently, my farts showed on my face. John glared at me.
What's so funny?
Nothing, just thinking this is what you reap what you sow.
If you weren't here, I could have been happy.
No, that's impossible. You both are in debt hell. Unable to argue with my words, John was grinding his teeth in frustration. To him, I just smiled and handed over a thick envelope.
What is this?
It's a baby shower gift. Nancy asked for $15,000. Aren't you going to show me the kids?
The kids are at their grandparents today. Wait, $15,000.
Right, like a payback for the alimony, right? Yes, the amount of $15,000 was actually what John and Nancy had paid me as alimony back then. Nancy, overwhelmed by debts, probably tried to use it to pay off her debts. She had left the kids at John's parents' house because she never intended to show us the kids in the first place. I then dropped another bombshell. Well, I hope those kids really are yours.
What do you mean?
John's face turned pale as he grasped the meaning of my words. If her recent affair had started before the pregnancy, there was a high chance he wasn't the father. It seemed John also realized that.
But Nancy said they look like me.
Well, she would say that, wouldn't she? She wouldn't want it to come out.
Everything you say could be a lie too.
What? I wouldn't waste my time lying, and if Nancy hadn't called me, I would have never wanted to deal with you again. As I kept cutting off John's arguments, his momentum faded. I confronted him further. This, an old medical test result.
Test result.
Yes, I asked the hospital and got the results again. The document I presented was a gynecological test result from when John and I were still married. It contained certain words.
Natural pregnancy is unlikely.
Yes, so when I heard about the twins, I remembered this. John was shocked as he looked at the test results. I had meant to tell him the results after his test, but Nancy had come to our house the day before I could tell him, and I missed the chance.
Those kids aren't mine.
It's highly likely.
Why bring this up now? Revenge?
As John came up with such an obvious question, I just smiled back at him. Then George spoke up.
You're on house arrest from tomorrow. Expect further notice. Assume that dismissal is unavoidable.
Wait, please. Anything but dismissal.
Even now, John was still begging. George returned his plea with a cold look. Then made a phone call. When John heard the name on the other end of the call, he went pale.
Calling the manager.
I've instructed them to properly investigate your case.
John collapsed to his knees, his face ashen.
It's all over.
Yes, your career as a banker is over.
Not just as a banker, with all the debt, his life might be over too. I fought this, but John probably knew it best. Seemingly out of energy to glare at me, John knelt on the ground, beginning to apologize to George.
I am truly sorry. Please. Anything but dismissal?
As I said, that's not possible.
When George firmly rejected him, John then turned to me, bowing his head. Was he that desperate to remain a banker? I was somewhat impressed in a way. While bowing to me, John had the audacity to say,
Emma, I am truly sorry. Is there any chance you could forgive me now?
"Is that because you think if I forgive you, you'll avoid being fired?"
That's part of it.
"How stupid are you?" Affirming this, I sighed deeply. And I stated clearly, "Even if I forgive you, it doesn't erase the fact of your embezzlement, and after all, my husband does not mix personal issues with professional ones."
Don't say that.
Hoping for a lifeline, John looked utterly despondent. Leaving a silent John behind, George and I left the scene. Later, I heard that Nancy sent divorce papers. John signed them and apparently gave up custody. It turned out the twins Nancy bore were indeed from her affair, and she became the talk of the bank. I received apologies from my ex-in-laws. We had been estranged during our marriage, but it seems they were just watching from a distance. I also heard that John is now secluded in his room at his parents' house. As George declared, he was fired from the bank, burdened with debt and required to return the embezzled funds. His life is reportedly very difficult. He is reportedly working multiple jobs day and night, subsisting on sprouts to stave off hunger. Once he came to our house in shabby clothes, but security prevented him from even reaching the entrance. I may seem heartless for not feeling pity for John's fallen state, but upon reflection, he brought this upon himself, so perhaps it's only natural. I had known Nancy's parents as acquaintances, so when I told them the truth, they were shocked. Apparently, their meeting with John was full of lies, and they hadn't known he was my ex-husband. After many apologies from them, I felt sorry myself. They offered to pay some money for the trouble, but I declined since it wasn't their fault. Nancy was taken away by debt collectors, and her whereabouts are unknown. Although a letter once arrived with a postmark from near the Bay Area, so she might still be alive somewhere. The twins were being raised by Nancy's parents, but being elderly, they couldn't manage and recently placed them in an orphanage. It might seem sad, but it's probably better than growing up around Nancy. Realizing how much I disliked Nancy made me understand my own feelings better. George is working hard as a bank manager, and though he often comes home late, he keeps in touch, so I'm not worried about infidelity. Meeting such a sincere person makes me feel fortunate, and the hardships of my divorce seem worthwhile if it meant getting to marry him. George recently hired a new secretary and wants to host a home party, excitedly maintaining the barbecue equipment, which makes me feel very happy. As for me, I've recently been enjoying day trips with the kids. We mostly do day trips close to home, but they are really refreshing and fun. George wants to join us, but he's too busy right now, so I'm enjoying the time with just the three of us. The older child, already a middle schooler, still affectionately calls me Mom. And the younger one hugs me and says I love you, making every day feel blissful. And now, a new life is growing inside me. Despite being 45 and facing a high-risk pregnancy with my first child, I am determined to nurture this gift of life. The kids are excited about having a much younger sibling, and we plan to choose a name for the baby as a family of 4 soon.
If it's a girl, I won't let her get married.
Come on, you're getting ahead of yourself. George suggested we wait to find out the gender, so we don't yet know if it will be a boy or a girl. Thanks to this, we spend our days happily imagining the future. Despite some tough days, my current happiness seems to override the past, and I feel very fortunate now. I have a feeling that the future will be bright. These farts cross my mind as I gently touch my belly.